All right. Welcome back to the channel. Doing another live reaction that will be posted as a video on my YouTube channel. Destiny versus this guy named Kaizen. Don't know who Kaizen is. Obviously know who Destiny is. And then let's see how it goes.
Start off with Destiny, tariffs. Destiny, you believe tariffs are impeachment worthy. Can you explain why you believe that?
For the statement of impeachment worthy, I mean, I would say that the president was granted, I think, an understandable ability to take extra special measures in great times of national emergency. And I think that what he's done is he's taken the ability to do those measures, one of those being tariffs, and he's kind of fabricated a national emergency by claiming that because we have big trade deficits, it's somehow a national emergency. And now he's using that to unilaterally conduct economic policy as the president. Whether or not I think the tariffs are a good or bad idea, I know everybody knows my opinion on this. I think they're a horrible idea, especially the way that he's done it. He shouldn't be doing these unilaterally. These should be passed through Congress. The president is not the sole source of our econ policy in the United States of America.
Can you go into more of why you believe it's like a horrible idea, tariffs?
Internally, they lack consistency. They say that they want to bring back manufacturing, but then they say they're willing to cut deals with other countries. So I don't know what that means. If we cut another deal with another country, wouldn't that undermine our own manufacturing? They say that they want to use the tariffs to bring back manufacturing, which implies there's going to be a whole bunch more jobs here for, I guess, blue collar workers or whatever. But then they also say that most of the jobs that come back here are going to be high tech jobs because you're not going to have the old factory jobs of the past. So that's a delusion. They try to say that that we need like factories here so that people can build and work and do stuff here, but our unemployment is incredibly low. I think it's still at about 4.5%. So I have no idea where all these new workers are going to come from. They don't exist right now. And then the workers that we do have that likely would take those jobs, they're trying to deport in record numbers. So no part of it seems to make sense in any way, size, shape, or form. The actual economic analysis is also just completely devoid of any logical rationale, like the idea that just because we have a trade deficit with a country means that somehow we're losing, I think betrays a very poor understanding of macroeconomics. I mean, there's like a million things I could talk, but yeah, I'll just start over there. Yeah.
Sure. Kaizen, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sure. So first, I think it's important to just zoom out and look at what the macro issue is that we're trying to solve, and then where does tariff fit into the strategy to resolve it. So I don't know what you call a national emergency, and I guess that's a bit of a qualitative assessment, but
I don't like that. So my interpretation of what he's doing is he's creating a conclusion. He's creating a conclusion. He's creating a reasoning for an action that doesn't make sense. It's kind of like just confirmation bias, basically. Something already happened, so you have to find a reason why it is good for the country. So he's starting off at a inappropriate place, in my opinion. So, we'll see.
We have a 127% GDP to debt ratio, or debt to GDP ratio. That's the highest it's ever been. And
True.
with $37 trillion in debt, $2 trillion deficit, we need to restructure things in America. Otherwise, we're going to have a bona fide emergency. So,
not true. As long as interest rates stay low, and we continuously make the payments that we have, then it doesn't mean disaster. Now, it's something we have to pay attention to, but it's not a national emergency. And the thing is, when it comes down to our situation, is it'll become problematic the moment we are unable of making those payments. But if your worry is by the increase, will eventually insinuate that we won't be able to make the payments. I feel like that is fine to be kind of worried about, but based off like the historical evidence of the United States being basically over 100% for the GDP to debt ratio for a while now, and consistently being able to function as intended, there as of right now, there's no worry. But I understand the worry, but we're not in an issue right now as long as we continuously make our payments and keep the interest rates low. But we do have to deal with it. But just because we get rid of our debt and all that stuff does not mean that it's going to be good for our country. Because that's how a recession started over the last time. We were like, we're just going to make our GDP, or we're just going to eliminate all our debt. And then that fucked up the entire country. So there's a nuance to do it, for sure.
First, do we agree that there's something that we need to head off at the pass, whether we agree that's an emergency right now or it'll be an emergency later?
No, I think that this is given as a truism with no qualifiers ever. I would ask you very simply, what should the debt to GDP ratio be?
I know it's the highest that it's ever been, including wartime.
Sure.
Right? So the highest it's ever been, even post World War II, was 119%. And I think we could agree that there's a point where it is too high. Could I give you a specific number? I couldn't.
But
And
it's not even a general number. Like, what's a country that's doing better than us, and then what's their debt to GDP ratio?
A lot of their debt to GDP ratio is relative to the United States. So even though it's the highest the United States has ever been, it's very relative to a lot of these other countries.
I think that this is a truism that's given with zero thought. I don't think Trump's thought about it. I don't think Lutnick has ever given a justification. I don't think anybody has ever thought about it. It's just kind of like a truism. Like, the debt is bad. Like, what should our debt even be? Is 50% good or 70%?
well, part of it is the issue is it's a confidence meter in a sense, right? So it reaches a point where the debt to GDP ratio is too high for anyone to want to take on American debt. Now, do
Yeah,
we
but
know?
when we say confidence meter,
Not necessarily. I think people will still try to take on American debt. The thing is, though, is the confidence meter is in relation not to the amount of debt, but it's in relation to the ability to pay back the debt. The United States of America has never been defaulted, meaning that they've never missed a payment. So the moment that America does miss a payment, then we're completely fucked. That's when we're at a disaster. But we're not in a situation where that's a problem right now. But the current situation with tariffs and all the other bullshit could put us in that situation.
So,
and
hold
they
on,
don't.
hold on,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
just finish one thing.
Sure.
So obviously, I can't discern from here what that point is, right? And for everyone, it's different. But there's a point where we basically go over the cliff, and we're trying to avoid that. So
I think the best way you can argue this, if I'm Kaizen, is that there is an increased likelihood that we hit that marker if the GDP to debt ratio continues to rise. And what was the point Destiny made? I play video games while I do this, so sometimes I have to lock in. Let me hear Destiny's. Let me remember Destiny's. I'm just gonna re-listen to Destiny's up.
sense, right? So that reaches a
I don't think Lutnick has ever given a justification. I don't think anybody has ever thought about it. It's just kind of like a truism. Like, the debt is bad. Like, what should our debt even be? Is 50% good or 70%?
part of
Oh, okay. Sorry, River. So I just had a terrible punch here. This is what happens when you play Madden and listen to political debates at the same time. But I prefer doing things this way. So the idea is ensuring that we don't hit the default that I was referring to earlier. And there's a stronger likelihood the larger the GDP to debt ratio becomes, right? And the interest at the end of the day will build. Now, it helps that our interest is low, so it doesn't build to a disgustingly drastic way. But the moment it hits a point where we're unable to pay it back and get defaulted because of how large it is just an increased likelihood. There's no strict numberhood, but there's no denying it can increase the likelihood. So that's the thing, right? That's the overarching thing. But I agree. We're not in a disaster
meter in a sense, right? So that reaches a point where the debt to GDP ratio is too high for anyone to want to take on American debt. Now,
When we say confidence meter,
So,
and
hold
they don't.
on,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
just finish one thing.
Sure.
So obviously, I can't discern from here what that point is, right? And for everyone, it's different. But there's a point where we basically go over the cliff, and we're trying to avoid that. So to the question of, are there nations with a higher GDP to debt ratio that are doing fine? I don't know, genuinely. But the question is this something that we need to get a handle on at all? So if we don't even agree on that, then the discussion on strategy is kind of moot. But do you agree that this is something that needs to be resolved or not?
I don't know what we're even resolving it to. So, like, for instance, when you said confidence meter, the USD was about as strong as it's ever been, despite supposedly this debt, being horrible and about to take us over a cliff. It was when Donald Trump started to take corrective measures on it that the USD started losing a lot of power, that the bonds market started to shake, and it made it look like other countries were losing faith in America. So, I feel like there's a lot of truisms given about the debt or given about macro econ, but like when you look at any of the numbers, you can't find any justification for it ever at all. Like, and nobody can talk about it. It's just kind of like these are just truisms given for like political points, I feel.
Okay, so you don't think that this is proven to be an issue that we do need to prioritize right now?
I think that
No.
there is a responsible and healthy discussion to have around what should our debt look like, how much debt should we have, and what policy should we take to alleviate that. None of those conversations are happening right now in this administration because they don't even understand what the debt is or
He's correct. Now, I just recently deep dove in for a political podcast episode, so that's why I am more knowledgeable about it now. But I don't think anything that Donald Trump is doing is in relation to the debt or the budget or the debt ratio at all. I'm gonna be honest.
really anything about economics in general, I guess. Like, just for instance, because we have a trade deficit with a country, that doesn't mean we're subsidizing them. Trump says it over and over again. It doesn't mean we're losing out to them. Trump says it over and over again. And it doesn't mean that it's weakening our economy, but Trump says it over and over again. So how can you even begin to have a discussion on what the debt should look like if we don't even have a basic understanding of like what a trade deficit is, I guess?
Yeah. So where I agree with you is Trump administration has not been good about messaging some sort of comprehensive idea of what the debt should be, why it's too high, why we need to get a
It's not even messaging. They haven't indicated any plan. So it's not even a message. It just doesn't exist.
handle on it and what the limits of that handle should be. So I agree with you there. And I'm not here
To be clear, real quick, we don't agree on that. I'm not saying they're not messaging on it. I'm saying they don't understand it.
Okay.
To be
And
clear.
I don't know
Okay.
that they don't understand
Okay.
it. I'm curious what makes you confident that they don't understand
Because
it.
every
versus
single step they've taken has
understand
been
it.
bad.
I don't think Trump understands it. I'll preface it with that.
Yeah. So this is one of those things where it's like, I personally don't feel confident that I have such a strong grasp of macroeconomics that I could say that A, every move that they're making is illogical, and B, that they don't even have a strategy. What I can say is that I'm pretty confident that having a $37 trillion debt and $2 trillion deficit is unsustainable. And at minimum, we need to correct the trend, even if we think that at the absolute, like we can sustain 127.
You know what? You know what's great about being on the internet? Looking shit up. That's what's great about being on the internet. So I'm gonna allow him to continue.
Debt to GDP ratio. So with that being a given, the question is, what should we do about it? And I think a lot of the time when we talk about tariffs, we talk about them in isolation. And where I agree with you is the tariff strategy has been opaque if it's there at all, right? We talk about tariffs in terms of wanting to reshore manufacturing,
right.
and then it turns about
Look at what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. Google search. Not a Google search. I use Bing. Don't judge me. All right. So GDP to debt ratio. Japan has a 248%. Jesus Christ. 248. Way larger than America's. Because America right now is like 140. So this is a little low, but it's around 140. Japan has 248. Sudan has 237. Singapore has 175, 152, 138, 33, 129. France has 115, 118. So there you go. And then this is what matters. I'm right here. Despite having one of the highest debt to GDP ratios, Japan has the lowest default risk. That's what matters the most. The default risk, not the GDP to debt ratio. So there we go. Let's continue.
we need to turn it into some sort of methodology for creating reciprocal tariffs, and it's more about fairness, and then it's about blue collar workers, and it's really unclear. But I know that the overall strategy is to at least cut the deficit to zero by increasing revenue on the revenue side through tariffs and reducing costs through DOGE, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And to me, that's something that Howard Lutnick has said. It's something that Scott Bessenson said. To me, that's at least a compelling directional approach to dealing with this. And I think it's very hard to assess where tariffs
I'm gonna let Destiny respond to
the overall picture, because we're also talking about things like deregulation. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's not as simple as, hey, we're going to put a tariff on this country and there's not going to be any negotiation past that. So,
Sure.
so there's been mixed messaging. I do like directionally, though, that someone is putting a stake in the ground and saying, hey, we need to resolve a deficit, because at least intuitively, this doesn't seem like something that we can sustain indefinitely. Tariffs are supposed to
intuitively based off no evidence and no reference and nothing that you can use to back up this claim. It's just you were told that this is a problem, so you think it's a problem. So that's legit all it is.
at
So
least
let's
help
be
with
honest.
that by bringing back American manufacturing, and then that raises corporate tax revenues, that we can tax more on the corporate side. They've also said some things about
Tax more corporate side. Donald Trump taxing corporate? Yeah, right.
cutting income tax below 150K and using tariffs to replace income tax. So for me, I just like that there's a president who's actually addressing this.
By having stupid ideas. Yeah, they're addressing it with nonsense. Addressing something with nonsense, it doesn't mean much to me. That's just me. It's like, hey man, I want you to clean up my yard, and then go like, okay, I have a plan to clean up the yard. I'm going to bomb your yard. I'm gonna throw it like 20 grenades to destroy your yard, right? And then all those weeds will be completely gone. And that is going to be way better than it was before. So that's legit what Trump is doing. And your logic is stupid. Oh, he has a direction. A bad direction is not good. Is not a good direction. I mean, obviously, that's us. What did I just say? That was a stupid thing I just said. What did I just say? Of course, it's not a good direction. Come on.
And I think many of the American people feel the same.
I think they feel the same because they're being lied to constantly. So this American president is the worst in all of human history for the U.S. debt in terms of adding to the U.S. debt. So if you want to deal with the debt, there's two ways to do it. You can either raise more revenue.
He's cooking because Donald Trump's recent bill adds more money to the national debt because it increases the military bill and everything he's cutting, even though he says that he's not going to cut Medicaid, which is a huge thing for the people. If they do cut Medicaid, it's still not going to change how the debt is going to increase because of the increase of the military budget. The things you're cutting is very marginal to the increase. And then add the what is it? Not global. Golden Dome plan, which adds another $175 billion to the budget. I mean, how is he helping the budget? Tariffs that he says he's going to do and then take it back? Is that? Yeah, no, that's not how any of this shit works.
Revenue, which he's opposed to doing because he wants to cut or he wants to extend the Trump tax cuts. And he's also caused an economic contraction to happen now, despite the fact that he came in with a booming economy. So the economy's gotten smaller, which means less tax receipts. He wants
Destiny's absolutely correct.
to extend the tax cuts, which have had a massive impact on our deficit. So you can either raise revenues, he's done the opposite of that in both worlds, or you can decrease your outlays. And it doesn't seem like this president is willing to cut any outlays either. So you have the fact that they asked for another $150 billion.
But Republicans want to cut Medicaid. That's the outlay he's referring to. Republicans really want to cut Medicaid. To be fair to Trump, he says he's not going to do it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what the Senate does.
Dollars from the Pentagon, the fact that they're asking for trillions of dollars increase to the debt ceiling. And then the fact that, again, this is one of those internally inconsistent things. We're saying tariffs are going to raise revenue. Well, the only way that the tariffs would raise revenues and the ways that they calculated it is if the consumption remains the exact same, which it won't, because obviously people are going to adjust their consumption based on the tariffs. And two, why would you want them to make a lot of money on tariffs? Why would you want the U.S. to make money on tariffs if the whole point of the tariffs was so that people stopped ordering international goods and started ordering domestic goods? It doesn't make any sense, right? We'd want to reduce the consumption of international goods, which would reduce the amount we collect in tariffs. So even if it's not even directionally good, it's just all of it is just horrible. It's just all of it is horrible. None of it is actually furthering anything to reduce the debt or the deficit, which is why by the end of this admin, the deficit likely won't go down. The debt absolutely won't go down. And there will be a failure on both those fronts, just like there has been with Doge, as we'll get to that. But I don't think any of the Trump people will even be willing to admit that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
He's absolutely correct about everything you just said.
So obviously it's difficult for us to prognosticate. I would say if look at the end of Trump's presidency, the debt and the deficit have not gone down, that is a failure. And then we'll just objectively know because they said they were going to do this thing. They said that.
Bitch, that shit pissed me off. You can't, you're not. So you're going to just blindly believe until at the end of the next 4 years? That's just brainwashed.
All these policies are meant to do this thing, and then they didn't do that thing. What I would say is that we need to consider the tariffs, again, as a toolkit in the overall toolbox. Because one of the things I don't even like about the framing is, hey, let's talk about tariffs. So that doesn't make much sense to me. It's like, no, let's talk about what the economic strategy is and what piece tariffs serve there, right? So you mentioned, for example, that assumes that consumption remains even. But if tariffs raise prices, then consumption will go down because prices will just be too high, right? Well, then we have to consider other things, right? So if we deregulate, for example, and we make it cheaper for companies to actually make goods in the US, might prices actually remain the same and consumption remain the same? That's possible.
That is impossible. That will never be the case. I'll bet any amount of money right now because in the United States, we just can't produce. We don't even have the companies necessary. The CapEx, the type of investment that we're looking to build those factories and train those people, we're at least a decade out in a lot of industries for this ever happening. There's no world where you peel back a couple regulations and all of a sudden magically the United States is competing with Thailand and China and Taiwan when it comes to manufacturing. That's never ever happening.
Okay.
I agree. It's never happening. He's probably gonna say what I'm thinking right now, so I'll just let it continue.
Well, I'm not
Mhm.
so confident that's never going to happen. And at
Okay.
least we see early signs that people are attempting to make it happen. And that's why
Wait, no,
we
we
see
don't.
different companies trying to invest in America. Yeah, we
Companies
see.
have always been investing in America. Most of the
Yeah,
investment that Trump tries to credit
but
for came from the
so,
CHIPS
so
Act.
Stephen,
Yeah.
this debate's not going to go very.
He's 100% correct. Most of the investment has 100% come from the CHIP Act and from Biden, but Donald Trump is taking credit.
Very well if you interrupt
Okay.
me and I don't interrupt you.
Sure.
So
Okay.
yeah. So we've seen Taiwan Semiconductor do that recently. This past week, we saw Saudi Arabia make investments. Obviously, that's more sovereign, not private companies. But we've seen many companies. We see Honda say that they're going to make the next Honda Civic over here rather than in Mexico. So we've seen companies at least making moves to try to reshore manufacturing. Whether it's
I'm
going
allowed to
to
go.
happen by the time that Trump
There's 2 hours. I can't pause every
That's
single time.
unknown, right? And then we have a timescale issue. But to say confidently, no, this is just never going to happen, I'm not sure how you can be so confident on that. I'm not confident. There's a level of confidence that I have, but it's not 100% in either direction. But the point is that moves are being made. We see early signs that companies are responding to it. And there's an open question of, is it going to be sufficient? And how much are tariffs going to lend to the strategy or take away from it? So look, my general note with economic discussions, I mean, even actual professional economists get this wrong. And this is one of those things where, honestly, I think what's underlying this whole debate for a lot of people is fundamentally, do you trust that this is a problem that needs to be solved? Do you trust the person trying to solve it? And do you trust the strategy that has been articulated? It sounds like where you're at is you don't trust that this is a problem that needs to be solved. You don't trust that Trump is a person to solve it. And you don't trust that there's a strategy. I trust that this is a problem to be solved. I'm unsure if Trump is the man to solve it. I am unsure on whether he has a correct policy to solve it because you haven't heard it thoroughly articulated comprehensively, but I think we need to do something because I don't think this.
I don't get where the debate is then. Honestly, if I'm Destiny, I was like, oh, okay, fine. I mean, as long as you're not lying and saying that what Donald Trump is doing is good, then sure, you can live in ambiguity. There's no discussion here. If I'm Destiny, I'm moving on from this. I mean, he kind of articulated that he's living in kind of a neutral stance, saying that, okay, if you think it's a problem, fine, but let's realize, based off the articulation laid out on Destiny, if he wants to live in limbo, in that happy medium, in that neutral area, that's fine. And Destiny articulated why the things they've been doing has not been working, and then just move on.
Is a sustainable track. And personally, I'm just happy that someone's trying to solve it at all.
Yeah, I don't know how we can say we're happy someone's trying to solve it at all when Trump has proven he had his first whole term where he proved he was horrible on things like the debt and the deficit. He added more to the debt than any president prior to that. A lot of the debt that accumulated even under Biden's term was a result of the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and a lot of the debt that we ended up, and a lot of the interest we paid on the debt that was accumulating under that. So there's no reason to believe that Trump would do anything good here because he failed on his first term. He's continuing to fail on his second term. Maybe something magical will change. The thing that bothers me the most when we say, is this something that we should talk about in terms of like what is a healthy debt to GDP ratio? I think there probably is a good conversation to have there. And I think there's a good set of steps that we can probably take to alleviate some of the fiscal burden that we have in the United States. That conversation can't take place now because nobody has any idea what it should look like. A lot of people are deluded into thinking the debt should be zero. And a lot of people are now fixated on, should we have a worldwide tariff policy that's been enacted unilaterally from the executive branch from a guy who has bankrupted casinos? And there's no reason to look at any of this and think that it's going to end positively. Nobody internationally thinks it's going to end positively. The markets don't think it's going to end positively. No foreign governments think it's going to end positively. Half the United States, the frustrating part is that all of this will end up not working out in 4 years, and everybody's going to, on the conservative side, will be scratching their heads, like thinking, like, well, who could have guessed? And it's like, well, we saw it didn't work in the first admin. He added record levels to the debt and the deficit, and now it's not going to work in the second admin. He's taking even more catastrophic steps. So I don't know what conversation we can even realistically have about alleviating the debt now.
Trump on the campaign trail promised to hire Elon to cut waste, fraud, and abuse from the government. If you were to give Doge a grade, how would you grade them?
Goddamn F. Fuck. Shit. I'll give it a D actually. The reason why is because I do believe we can have a legitimate conversation on increased efficiency when it comes to the government and certain bureaucracies. I don't inherently believe bureaucracies is bad. I'm not interested in the boogie word that is bureaucracy. They are a tool used to increase efficiency based off all the other kind of not. So I'm gonna use the word minute. That doesn't diminish the issue, but it's just a lower scale issue, a subsection issue of a grander plan. So they have their purposes, but ultimately you can definitely argue that there's some innate inefficiencies that could be addressed and could be discussed. I think that's fine. So the fact that they brought attention to that is why they get a D. Now everything they've been doing has been trash. So
Okay, so I'd say, Doge's stated goal is to remove $1 trillion from the deficit on the spending side. Today, if we take their numbers to be accurate, they've saved 170 billion. Some of this is pending congressional approval to actually be concretized. But that's, I consider, a pretty good clip considering that they're less than 170 days even in office. Now, in order for them to save as much as they want to, I think they probably need to do more than just efficiency cuts, and then we get into more sensitive conversations about entitlements and things like that. My general thesis is, and this kind of goes back to the debt conversation and deficit conversation, something radical does need to be done. So I proceed from
something radical only needs to be done if there's an issue that needs to be addressed right now. If you don't know why a big debt is an issue, if you don't know what the ramifications of it are, if you don't have an ideal GDP to debt ratio, then you're fighting ghosts. And then you're doing something radical without concrete purposes. And that radical thing that you're doing without really knowing if it's going to solve anything will collapse the country. So you have no real reason to think that we need to do something radical at all, actually.
On the basis that I'm happy something's being done at all. My biggest criticism of Doge is I think the messaging has been really poor. It's been really unclear what their criterion is for making cuts or.
Why are we saying messaging seems like a very soft term to say? I think is a soft term to think that is a soft term to use to insinuate that I'm okay with what they're doing. I'm not okay with, they haven't been transparent, right? It's just a very soft term for sure in terms of the scope of what they've actually been doing.
For laying people off. It's been unclear how much of this is politically motivated, like when we consider the stuff with USAID versus actually about massive efficiency gains. That said, what I've seen from him is a level of flexibility when it comes to making cuts where they're actually not impervious to feedback and they're amenable to making changes. So for example,
only if they, okay, let me give
I know that they cut about 10,000 jobs from Health and Human Services, and they ended up reinstating 20% of them because they realized, hey, we actually need those jobs.
Because everybody else said that was a fucking stupid idea and they got pressure to do it. They're not. I'm gonna let Destiny cook on that.
I think it was similar with the Nuclear Security Administration. They cut, I want to say something like 100.
I'm gonna keep my mouth shut. I feel like Destiny is gonna say exactly what I'm thinking. Go.
Over 100 or 177 jobs, and they ended up reinstating a lot of them because they realized they need them. So there are cases where they overcut, and obviously when people overcut, like that's bad. But they've shown that they are willing to be dynamic and flexible with correcting those overcuts. And I also think that the way that they've been treating the layoffs in particular has been a lot more humane than they've been given credit for, because the vast majority of the employees who have been let go have received severance, in many cases 8 to 12 months of severance. And that runs contrary to a lot of a dialogue on like, hey, people are just losing jobs and it's just complete chaos and they're using a cudgel for everything. So overall, I would give them a B+. I think it's a little early. It's going to be sunset by July 2026. And look, there's a clear objective goal. Either they cut $1 trillion or not, and then we can be much more objective about how much they cut and whether it was enough. But overall, I'm positive on the changes that they've made. I'm positive on the fact that they're willing to take feedback. And I think one thing that people don't understand.
One thing, oh yeah. Oh yeah, this guy is an Elon Musk shill, bro. Because the way he's framing everything is so positive. It's so positive. But am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised at all.
But the way Doge is structured is they don't actually have statutory authority to make cuts unilaterally. It's not like Elon or anyone else in that department is just going in and cutting things without consulting with the agency or department heads. So given that in many cases they have an engineer, a lawyer, and then some sort of liaison for Doge embedded in the department, and the department is actually agreeing, hey, yeah, we can make these cuts. I'm just happy that there's some sort of influence in these departments that is looking at this with a fresh eye and recommending cuts. B, I'm glad that departments are
Oh my God, he's a show for Elon and Doge. Oh my gosh.
agreeing with those cuts and following through.
So the court's constantly reprimanding Doge for doing some bullshit that doesn't trigger any alarms to you. Like, okay,
Through. And I think this was necessary. I think the question is just on the margins, are they doing as good of a job as the ideal Doge could do? So for me, it's B+.
Yeah, that's an easiest F in the world. Doge came in promising $2 trillion in cuts, and they've walked away with anywhere from 50 to 150 billion, maybe. I don't know in what world you miss your target by an order of magnitude and still manage to get a passing grade. Also,
Right.
Doge's mission was to come in and find waste, fraud, and abuse, not try to make personnel cuts in programs that they don't like. So they didn't even hit their original mission at all. I'm going to be honest. I think every liberal was a little bit scared to see Doge come in and find a whole bunch of waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, because obviously that would look pretty bad. I did expect them to find some stuff. I'm actually astounded that they came in with like an open book to go through everything and came away with absolutely nothing. There was not a zero credible claim of waste, fraud, or abuse that Doge came away with, despite the firings, despite going in and, kicking out security guards, despite getting to go through as much data as they wanted to. The
he's completely correct. Completely.
thing we've gotten is a worse understanding of a lot of these agencies, because Elon Musk himself has been involved in the proliferation of a lot of lies about them. For instance, spreading the lie that Social Security is paying out people that are over the age of 120 or whatever. This is a lie that's been repeated over and over and over again that every conservative will not believe until the day that they die, because once you believe a lie that Trump has told you, you can never, ever, ever disavow that lie. They didn't manage to find any credible amounts of waste or fraudulent behavior or abusive behavior. They just went through and they Control F for DEI and cut every whatever program they felt like they didn't like. I think it's a cowardly way for Trump to try to curb the size of the government rather than presenting to Congress, here are systematic cuts that I think we should make in large, or programmatic cuts that we should make in large government programs to save money. They haven't done that. They're just trying to like fire random people to make savings. So, I mean, I don't know. They came in looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. It seems like they found none. I haven't heard of anything regarding that. No credible claims of that. And they missed their mark by at least an order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude, if they end up getting only 20 billion or whatever worth of cuts approved by Congress. So I don't know what world that's ever, especially given all the political capital expended on it, all the drama related to it. I don't know what world that could ever be seen as like a success in any way, size, shape, or form.
Cool. So it sounds like we have some facts to reconcile before we can even get to the subjective analysis. So let's just see if we agree on this. So I have heard from Howard Lutnick and Elon that the goal is 1 trillion. Maybe at some prior point they said 2 trillion, but my understanding is their most up-to-date goal is $1 trillion in cuts to a deficit. Have you heard differently? Because you said 2 trillion.
Elon himself stated 2 trillion multiple times. They might have walked that back to 1 trillion. Even at 1 trillion, it's still an order of magnitude miss in terms of the cuts they found or found they recommended. Yeah.
Okay, good. And do we agree that the goal is to sunset Doge by July 2026? So any cuts made now is not actually.
Yes, but my understanding is
not actually complete with the process.
Yes, but my understanding is the majority of what they've suggested is basically done, that they've kind of like taken a step back now. So they might find little things, but basically the majority, the bulk of the work is done at this point.
Okay, my understanding is not that. So my understanding is that Elon is a special government employee. He's there for 130 days. He's used up the majority of that, so he can't be full-time on the team. But they have other people in Doge. They have Amy Gleason leading it now. She used to be in the government, or was in the government, and she's a more traditional full-time employee. And this work is going to continue until July of 2026, which means we have a full year to make up the gap between, you're calling it,
You didn't address this point when he said that they pretty much indicated that they got the majority of the cuts, because a lot of it was just political in nature without really, and it's very marginal. It didn't really do much to the totality of the budget.
30 to 150 billion. They're saying on their website 170 billion. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. I don't know. And then there's a question of how much of this actually gets approved by Congress and concretized. But to say it's an F, for me, it just sounds hyperbolic just because we're literally not at the finish line yet. And if we expected them to cut $1 trillion to $2 trillion,
Motherfucker, you gave them a B+.
what, 130 days in, I think that was an unrealistic expectation. Now, if it is true, and I have not heard this, that the bulk of the cuts that can be made have already been made, then obviously that's a failure. But my understanding is no one is warranting that. The bulk of the work that Elon can do in this fiscal year has been done directly, but there's still a team there, right? There's still dozens of Doge employees embedded in these departments continuing to make cuts. So again, this is one of those things where, unfortunately, the timing of this debate is such that we're a bit early in the process to assess the long-term impact of things like economic shifts or changes to spending. But I think to have a sense of proportionality, like we're not even halfway in to the amount of time that's been outlaid to make the changes on the Doge side, and to already call it a failure doesn't make sense to me.
Well, have they found any waste, fraud, or abuse?
Well, so the Government Accountability Office in 2022 said they identified $250 billion in improper payments. Majority of that was overpayment, right? So there's tons of
Yeah, but what you
For
just
sure,
said, that
wait,
was the
for-
Government Accountability Office, not Doge.
and Doge is looking into the particulars of what those improper payments were. So what I'm saying is there's a bucket
So they found nothing.
of at least $250 billion here that we know that in 2022 was wasted. Now, how much of that is fraud? How much of that is
But Doge found nothing, though. It was a neat trick you try to pull, but at the end of the day, Doge found nothing, is what you're.
used? I don't know, but that's what Doge is looking into now.
I don't think Doge is looking into that. I think the Government Accountability Office and I think that the Office of Inspector General is looking into that. The easiest way to pull the plug on this argument is if you really cared about saving money for the government, then the number one most efficient program to put money into is the IRS, of which they're trying to pull people out of. There's some $400 to $600 billion annually. That's every single year of money out there that the IRS just can't go after because they don't have the manpower for it. And Republicans gleefully try to pull employees out of it or take employees out of the IRS, as Trump just bragged about it. So, I mean, like, I just don't think there's any real genuine effort there to actually save money, because if they were, they would just fund the IRS.
Okay, so there's a discussion to be had about what should
And
they
increase
do
the
different.
budget for the military as well.
Not what they have done, because you think they haven't done anything. So at minimum, there's the $20 to $30 billion in untagged payments that were identified, and we don't know where the money went. We don't know what it was for. We don't know if it was coded to the budget, but it was identified that, hey, this is a very simple thing. For anyone who's ever worked at a corporation where you've had to pay things on behalf of the company, when you pay for things on behalf of the company, you tag it. You just like tag
They
it
do that in the
field.
government. Every
Yeah.
time that Doge brought that up, it was a lie.
Well,
Every single time it was a lie.
My understanding is it's not a lie.
That's fine.
And-
It is a lie. That's why there's no prosecution that's been referred. That's why nobody's talking about specifically
But hold
anything.
on,
It's all a
let me
lie,
just
man.
finish. So you're saying it's a lie. Let me tell you how, if it were true, it would work. It's literally, there's a field that's optional where you can indicate what the payment is for. It was not indicated. And this doesn't mean that there was a mass amount of fraud, but it was one of these very simple things where, hey, the systems were not properly designed to make sure that we have accountability and transparency over how every single dollar was spent. Now, how much of that is incompetence? How much of that is malfeasance? I don't know. You're saying it's completely a lie, and I guess I don't know what the implication here is, that every single payment is tagged and we know exactly where every dollar
They know
went.
government stuff.
Right.
If you know anybody
But-
that works in
but-
government or does anything, they're pretty carefully accounted for. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what, if appeal to authority. I don't know if, like, you know someone in government who's told you this is a lie, but at minimum, if we agree that we trust the GAO and we trust that when they say that there's $250 billion in underpayments, overpayments, and payments that they don't know where it went, then the question is, okay, well, how much of that $250 billion at least has Doge captured? I'm identifying 20 to 30 billion and saying, hey, we know that, or allegedly, according to them, and you don't believe them, but I'm taking it at face value, they're saying it was not tagged, and now it's getting tagged. So that's a very simple change that's been made, that it doesn't get us all of the way there, but it's a demonstrable difference in moving the needle on actually cutting the amount of spending that the government is doing. In addition to that, I mean, the Social Security Administration for years has identified that yeah, there is fraud in Social Security, there is fraud in payouts, and Doge has been on top of looking at that too. So unfortunately, it feels like there's just a bit of an unbridgeable divide, because if you're just saying it's a lie, like, I'm actually interested in how you can prove the negative here.
Well,
Like, prove to me.
it's super simple on my side. So when you're
Mhm.
talking about those mistags of payments, okay, fine. Let's say that there was some fraudulent behavior there. Who's been recommended for charges? What is the FBI or the DOJ going after? The answer for these is always going to be nobody and nothing, because all of it is a lie. Whether or not there's like a payment tagged on a database, anybody that's worked with a sophisticated enough system knows that there's sometimes multiple systems. Sometimes stuff is tagged, sometimes it's not. Just because it's not tagged doesn't necessarily mean that it's fraudulent, wasteful, or abusive, or that somebody else is accounting for it. A really great example of this is the claims that Elon Musk and Trump have made about the Social Security Administration paying people that are over the 120 years old or whatever. There's a file externally that is the SSA updates called the DMF, the Death Master file. That file they'll update sometimes with cause of death or death that other agencies or creditors can kind of like use just to look at it to help them monitor stuff. That's not the same record, for instance, though, that the Social Security Administration uses to pay people out. The idea that we're paying thousands of people who are already dead was a total lie that was said over and over again and is still said to this day by the majority of conservatives, by Trump and by Elon. But when you actually read, because the SSA has its Office of Inspector General, you can read the report. This has been known that updating that Death Master file sometimes is like really difficult for a variety of reasons. It doesn't mean there are fraudulent payments going out. When you're talking about payments going out as a result of inappropriate payments, my understanding is about 60% of those are recovered, 40% aren't. Sometimes it could be as simple as like a person dies and then an SSA check goes out like the next day and then they have to like recover it. Most of the time, it's pretty easy to do. It's pretty trivial. I don't think Doge is helping recover any of this. And like I said, if there was any actual like waste, fraud, or abuse, then I would expect we would see some type of criminal charge or something recommended to the DOJ, and that just hasn't happened, and it won't happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we're prognosticating about whether it will happen. We're very early into the administration. Maybe it happens. Maybe they actually do prosecute people. And in many cases, I don't think a prosecution is needed because if it's simply waste and it's simply error and it's simply entropy, you don't need to prosecute someone for that all the time. As you just acknowledged yourself, sometimes there's many systems. Some of them are antiquated. Some of them are not talking to each other. And even in the case that 60% of these funds are recovered, 40% are not, then there's a 40%, there's a large S that we can actually recover and we can actually be looking into. So
fund the SSA.
Sorry?
Stop pulling employees in from the SSA. Fund the SSA.
Yeah, it might not be an issue of funding the SSA. It might be an issue of making the SSA more efficient and actually updating the systems and updating this DMF, as you pointed out. Or as I understand it, there are systems that are called.
All right, what did he say? That an entire domain is making up information without any facts to support his case, just as subjective opening, which is an unfortunate claim. He just gave evidence, but you got it.
Of funding the SSA, it might be an issue of making the SSA more efficient and actually updating the systems and updating.
All right, what did he say?
And even in the case that 60% of these funds are recovered, 40% are not, then there's a 40%, there's a large S that we can actually recover and we can actually
okay.
The entropy. You don't need to prosecute someone for that all the time. As you just acknowledged yourself, sometimes there's many systems. Some of them are antiquated. Some of them are not talking to each other. And even in the case that 60% of these funds are recovered, 40% are not, then there's a 40%, there's a large S that we can actually recover and we can actually be looking into. So
fund the SSA.
Sorry?
Stop pulling employees in from the SSA. Fund the SSA.
Yeah, it might not be an issue of funding the SSA. It might be an issue of making the SSA more efficient and actually updating the systems and updating this DMF, as you pointed out. Or
how are you going to make something more efficient by taking resources from it? If you're going to make something more efficient and updating technology, you put more resources into it. Then you can check on what people are actually doing, and that could indicate some type of cuts. But ultimately, in order to make something better, usually we put more funding into it. Right. That's why I am one of those people who do not believe in defund the police. This is basically the same logic you're indicating, by the way. I say that we should put more funding into the police departments and have better training. That is my claim. Now, obviously, could be a threshold where the funding is useless. And we can kind of go into that bit by bit. And I think that's fine. I'm perfectly okay with that. But ultimately, the idea when making something more efficient is not typically cut people, fire people, and take money away from it. That's not typically how it works. It is mostly updating technologies, looking at tasks that they do, and reroute it to ensure that it is optimized.
Or as I understand it, there are systems that are coded on really old code called COBOL. And there's not many coders who actually code in COBOL anymore. So it's like, why are we using old systems? So some of this is just modernizing the systems that we have in government and getting off of old software licenses we're not using anymore, canceling old contracts that we're not using anymore, and just modernizing and making things more efficient. And the proof of that being done effectively wouldn't mean necessarily that people are going to jail. The proof of that would be that the actual amount of spending goes down. So again, as I said before, the proof of this should not be that people are going to jail over waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, the fraud for sure. But the proof of this should be that the actual number is going down. And you've acknowledged that there's somewhere between 30 and 150 billion that they actually have saved. So there's something. It's not nothing, as you've been saying sometimes. They're reporting that's $170 billion. And it's not the fraud for sure. But the proof of this should be that the actual number is going down. And you've acknowledged that there's somewhere between 30 and 150 billion that they actually have saved. So there's something. It's not nothing, as you've been saying sometimes. They're reporting that's $170 billion in saving. Even if the truth is somewhere in between, even if we cut it at halfway, let's say we take the halfway point and it's somewhere between 80 and 120 billion, that's substantive. And
shit, I didn't pay attention.
What is somewhere in between? Even if we cut it at halfway, let's say you've acknowledged that there's somewhere between 30 and 150 billion that they actually have saved. So there's something. It's not nothing, as you've been saying. Should not be that people are going to jail over waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, the fraud for sure. But the proof of this should be that the actual number is going down. And you've acknowledged that there's somewhere between.
I'm trying to catch, like, what is he referring to?
Getting off of old software licenses or not using anymore.
I got too many people kind of
updating this DMF.
Diverting my attention.
These funds are recovered, 40% are not. Then there's a 40%, there's a large S that we can actually recover and we can actually be looking into. So whether it will happen, we're very early into the administration. Maybe it happens. Maybe they actually do prosecute people. And in many cases, I don't think a prosecution is needed because if it's simply waste and it's simply error and it's simply entropy, you don't need to prosecute someone for that all the time. As you just acknowledged yourself, sometimes there's many systems. Some of them are antiquated. Some of them are not talking to each other. And even in the case that 60% of these funds are recovered, 40% are not, then there's a 40%, there's a large S that we can actually recover and we can actually be looking into. So
fund the SSA.
Sorry?
Stop pulling employees in from the SSA. Fund the SSA.
Yeah, and it might not be an issue of funding the SSA. It might be an issue of making the SSA more efficient and actually.
It sounds like you have a conclusion and you're working backwards. You're not really looking at how everything kind of leads into a more optimal solution. You had a solution already inputted in place, the overarching idea that we need to cut, and everything works around that overarching idea. Because ultimately, I'm not allowed to continue. Maybe he said something that actually makes sense.
Updating the systems and updating this DMF, as you pointed out. Or as I understand it, there are systems that are coded on really old code called COBOL. And there's not many coders who are actually coding COBOL anymore. So it's like, why are we using old systems? So some of this is just modernizing the systems that we have in government and getting off of old software licenses we're not using anymore, canceling old contracts that we're not using anymore, and just modernizing and making things more efficient. And the proof of that being done effectively wouldn't mean necessarily that people are going to jail. The proof of that would be that the actual amount of spending goes down. So again, as I said before, the proof of this should not be that people are going to jail over waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, the fraud for sure. But the proof of this should be that the actual number is going down. And you've acknowledged that there's somewhere between 30 and 150 billion that they actually have saved. So there's something. It's not nothing, as you've been saying sometimes. They're reporting that's $170 billion in saving. Even if the truth is somewhere in between, even if we cut it at halfway, let's say we take the halfway point and it's somewhere between 80 and 120 billion, that's substantive. And my question to you, Stephen, is do you think that there should be well, actually, it's not fair to say that because you did say that there should be a plan presented to Congress and that's the way that we should do it. I would say, well, we've tried that so many times. We tried that so many times. The best that we've been able to save is like $30 billion. And I'm glad that there's some sort of different approach.
All right.
Where we're bringing in people from private industry. We're focusing on not just conventional government planning to actually reduce the amount that we spend and actually trying to modernize systems, make them more efficient, and just update government. So yeah, that's why I give it a B+. I can understand why you wouldn't want to give it a B+. I don't understand how you can give it an F, given that we're literally not at July 2026.
I'm gonna allow, before I allow Destiny to say what he says. That's why I gave it a D, because at least it brings attention to something, which I do think is fair. But in terms of things they actually did, there's no way you can kind of look at it positively, unless you really hated the programs that they cut stuff. But none of that was waste, fraud, and abuse by any means.
Doge came in to find waste, fraud, and abuse. They didn't
Mhm.
find waste, fraud, and abuse. They
Mhm.
came in to make suggestions for cuts. To
Oh my god. Oh, yeah, fine. I'll delete it, bro. I'm just like not interested in debating some of this stuff anymore. I'm just not.
programs because Republicans have given up on trying to govern this country. If Republicans want to cut from the government, if they actually want to decrease the amount that they spend, then you go to government to do government. You don't get to bring in a guy who's frying his brain on ketamine to try to make a whole bunch of arbitrary cuts in personnel because you're too lazy or stupid to figure out how to actually write the bills to cut the departments. I don't like this idea that conservatives go, well, it was too hard, so we brought in a guy unilaterally to just start hacksawing stuff, and this is our way of doing it. Doge was brought in to find waste, fraud, or abuse, not reread to me in a less coherent voice things that are on Government Accountability Office or Office of Inspector General reports from 2022 or 2023. It's a waste of money. It's a demonstration of a lack of ability to do business. Elon Musk became everybody's worst middle manager. Anybody that's worked in private industry knows how annoying it is to get a random email from some C-level exec saying, "Send me 5 things that you worked on this week." Oh, like it was so annoying that half the cabinet heads were like telling their departments. I think Kash Patel, maybe Hegseth was saying like, "Guys, don't waste your time responding to this. This is stupid. Okay, this is dumb." It was a total failure in every single like size of the way you can measure it up. It was a failure. They came in looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. They came away with personnel cut recommendations because they don't know how to recommend these things to Congress. And the small things that we want to take credit for Doge, like you're talking about optimizing systems, that department was already in place. Obama put it in place. It's called the USDS, which is what Doge kind of like became a cancer onto. It was the United States Digital Service, which was supposed to go around and optimize government systems. If they want to, and this, I don't like this because Trump will suggest something crazy and stupid, and then when it comes in and it fails, everybody tries to walk it back to a more reasonable program. If Doge had come in saying, we want to help the USDS make the federal government more efficient, and we think that there are ways that we can do that, okay, well then fine, that's cool. That wasn't what was promised. What was promised was Elon Musk saying $2 trillion in cuts from a $1.7 trillion discretionary budget, which is what our spending is on the discretionary level, by finding waste, fraud, and abuse. The numbers that he cited over and over again were crazy. And at the end, we came away with drama relating to shuttering departments unilaterally, like USAID, or we came away with personnel cut recommendations, which are neither waste nor fraud nor abuse. So it's an easy F.
Yeah, so I would say that personnel cuts can be cutting waste. I mean, if there's a certain amount of people doing a job and we can do the job with fewer people, then anyone above that we don't need. And that's unfortunate because obviously it sucks for those people who are doing the job to be removed from the job. But this is very normal in private industry. You say, hey, we actually have too many employees.
But okay, the only way that's normal. Well, I mean, if he has a grander idea that we're in dire need to cut money from the budget, even though this is marginal cuts, like it doesn't really do that much of a dent to the overall budget. But if he thinks this is such a big problem, then I guess see it. Most of the time, when private industries do it, they are able to replace that efficiency with some other tool. For example, AI or just automation customer service, for example. So they were able to replace the manpower with tools to lessen the workload, but also increase the modern technology for efficiency. The problem is we don't know if they're doing that, right? We don't know if they're actually making things more efficient, or are they just unilaterally cutting things and cutting people without updating the technology first. Do they even have technology in mind to update? So I don't really get the idea
Do
here.
something that now either due to better systems or better technology, we can do with fewer people. So I would say that laying off people does constitute removing waste. And I'm not sure what you consider waste that wouldn't be personnel cuts. There's obviously examples of waste that are not just personnel cuts, but I would say personnel cuts falls under the category of waste. So to say, oh, well, all you did is cut employees, that's not actually resolving waste, fraud, and abuse, I think is categorically not true.
I don't think
Now,
there's any way.
let me just finish what I'm saying. Some of what you said, I mean, Elon being fried on ketamine and Republicans are not trying to govern the country. I mean, this is like theorizing about people's state of mind and ad hominem. I don't think that's really necessary. And I'm not really interested in speculating on what Elon's mental state is or Republicans' motivations. But again, we go back to the higher level problem, which is that
You're not interested in people's motivations. That's so problematic. That doesn't even make sense to me. If you don't consider their motivations, then there could be an inherent darker purpose. When I looked into the situation regarding MAGA and where all of this kind of derived from, I was able to kind of find very, very potentially problematic stuff with like Curtis Yarvin and Peter Thiel and kind of the foundation and principles that adhere to what MAGA is doing right now. And it did not come from a good place. So not caring about the responsibility, not caring about the motivations is, I'm just going to say, it can lead down to a very problematic and evil place.
We have a massive deficit. In my mind, we need to get a handle on it. At least directionally, we need to get a handle on it so it doesn't increase. We've tried the traditional approaches that you've identified. We've tried the conventional government agencies, audit other agencies, and then make recommendations to Congress, and then Congress approves those changes, and it hasn't been working. And that's why we need to, as annoying as it could be to have a private industry middleman involved in the picture, look to private industry. And this is not completely without precedent. I mean, Henry Ford helped the government. Howard Hughes helped the government. We've had business magnates help the government at stages in the U.S.'s development before.
Now, whether you think Kaizen or Destiny is winning the debate so far, one thing is for sure, your data shouldn't
make your bag.
So private industry, the question is, how do we actually get this deficit in hand? And I haven't seen any public sector approach that's been successful. I see a private industry success that is at least more successful than every approach prior, because the most savings that we've ever gotten is around 30 billion. And if that's a low end of your range, then Doge is actually already doing better than they've done in the past. And I think that's something that shows early signs of promise. Again, if we don't get it through Congress, a lot of this doesn't actually end up mattering at the end of the day. But I would like to hear, what is an approach that we haven't tried, that we should try, that doesn't involve private industry, that you think would work?
A real approach would be having people come together when you go to make the budget and suggesting these are programs that we need to make. We actually need to make programmatic cuts to huge parts of the federal government. But the problem is nobody wants to do that because they know that U.S. citizens generally enjoy those programs. And so they're too cowardly to actually cut from any of those programs. So that's one way to do it, is to cut from the programs. The second way to do it is to keep the programs the same size, but to continue to grow the economy. And Trump is doing the exact opposite of both of those. Our economy is contracting right now because he's destroying faith in the USD and faith in the United States at large across the world. And because we're reducing our tax receipts, our revenue, by way of economic contraction, and because he wants to extend the tax cuts for the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So again, if we were ever going to have a conversation on the debt, on the deficit, I think that we could have that conversation. But now we're even further from having that conversation because we're fixated on whatever Doge is or whatever this is. We're not going to, like, if the deficit, the budget deficit, and of course the debt will grow, but if the deficit grows or stays the same, will you admit that it was an utter failure the entire 4 year? If after a year or two, will you say, okay, well, this has failed, this is not working?
Yes, because then enough time will have expired for us to see the objective result, and the objective result was not met. So absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Stephen, I mean, obviously we don't know each other well, but you know, when you say like conservatives or Republican, I consider myself neither of those. I know you're not necessarily saying I am, but we're addressing a party that's not in the room, and I'm not here to argue on their behalf. What I'm saying is that there's a problem that needs to be addressed, and the way that the first solution that you propose, which is that we propose programmatic adjustments, we tried that. And it hasn't worked.
No, the Republicans aren't trying that.
No, Republicans and Democrats don't do that.
Democrats do try, but Republicans are half of Congress.
And all of Congress doesn't do it. And we don't accomplish it. And it doesn't seem to matter who has the majority. It doesn't get done. Obama tried to do this too, right? He tried to make cuts. It was like trivial cuts on the margins, shutting down old websites. At the end of the day, what's happened is clearly our government by itself is not sufficient to actually solve this problem. We need.
But it's the problem is how badly of a problem you think this actually is. Like, the people, of course, the government wants to become more efficient and wants to, not spend money that they are not using and all that stuff. Like, we all recognize that. The issue, though, is that when it comes to a process that has an overarching issue that you're referring to, and that process is minimizing the institutional structure that exists that keeps our country as great as it is, then at that point you have to ask yourself, does the ends justify the means? And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think you can make that argument. I'm gonna be right back.
a creative approach to solving this problem. This is, hopefully we can agree, undoubtedly creative. It has some clear downsides. What I agree with you is this public spectacle around Doge and like constantly like people arguing on X about whether a program should be cut and all the partisanship around it is sad, unnecessary, and distracting. So that's why for me, it's like I'm not willing to give it an A, because the messaging has been so politicized and so hyperbolic. But we need something different. And you're saying the Republicans won't get in line. To me, neither house seems to be getting in line with it, because no cuts are not popular, because yes, many Americans like these programs that we have, and no one likes to have things taken away. And what I've seen, to your point about like programs getting cut, that's what Doge has been doing. Now, if we have a disagreement on whether these programs that have been cut should be cut, I think it's a healthy discussion to have. Like we can talk about USAID, whether that should be removed. We can talk about the departments that have been downsized. We can talk about Health and Human Services getting rid of 2,000 employees. All these things are reasonable discussions to have. But what I don't think is a reasonable discussion to have is discussions about whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans and talking about these hypotheticals where all the Congress people get together and solve, because it just hasn't been working. And frankly, as an American taxpayer and someone who's been observing government from the outside for years now, it's like, I'm just glad that we're trying something different.
I mean, like this is the Republicans throwing their hands up, and it's the meme comic of we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. If Republicans want to govern, the country is here to be governed. But as long as half the country is just having an epic time following Trump into, whatever abyss they're happy to follow him into, nothing is going to get done. Like none of the Doge stuff is probably going to get solidified by Congress. Most of the people in Congress are not happy with any of the suggested cuts. It's just nothing. Like when Republicans decide, okay, well, we have to actually come together and we need to start writing legislation, then something will get done. It's not a both sides issue. Democrats are able to pass way more legislation. The economy and the budget, both, so fiscally and the economy, tend to do better under Democrats. Every time a Democrat comes back into office, they have to waste the first year or two trying to bail them out of whatever catastrophe the last Republican got them into. When Obama came in, it was trying to recover from the housing crisis. When Biden came in, it was recovering from COVID. And then afterwards, you get a Republican who came in. Look, you've got Donald Trump coming in now. He came in off of Obama's heated economy and tried to take credit for the economy growing out of that, even though Trump added record levels to the debt and deficit. And now Trump has come in after the economy was doing great under Biden. We were dominating OECD and G7, like in every conceivable way. And now he's like managed to cause an economic contraction after a quarter. It's frustrating to see a Democrat comes in and has to clean up after the last Republican. The last budget deficit, or I'm sorry, the last budget surplus we had was under Clinton, was under a Democrat. It's just frustrating. The Democrat has to come in, clean up the mess. The Republicans come in, they make more and more of a mess. They spend like crazy. And then everybody goes, wow, both parties in the United States sure are messed up right now. Like it's just that blows my mind.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really want to make this a partisan conversation, but I think the framing of, Republicans mess it up and then Democrats clean it up, I don't think that's accurate at all. I mean, even if we talk about Clinton, creating this surplus, he inherited the conditions for a surplus to be created. And for sure, he stewarded that, but those the deregulation efforts that created the economy that was booming by the time he entered office, and early when he entered office, that was instantiated by Reagan. So if we're going to say that, it's the Democrats just inherit messes and then they spend the first few years cleaning things up, I don't think that's true. In Bush's case, I think that was true, because I think Bush was one of the worst presidents of all time. And I think Obama had to recover from Bush, and we saw the housing crisis.
And Trump inherited Obama's economy and took credit for it and massively spent. He did a huge tax cut without pairing it with any spending cuts.
And they all spend. Right? And there's been no
Republicans spend more.
I'm pretty sure in
Bush on both wars and Trump. Yeah, sorry, God.
In point of fact, I'm pretty sure Biden actually spent more than Trump. Now, obviously, there was a black swan event in COVID, and Biden had all of COVID. Trump only had part of COVID, but I'm pretty sure, in point of fact,
most of the extra
more.
spending under Biden was because of the tax cuts from Trump, the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that they're trying to renew now. Like all of the extra interest on the debt, and then all of the extra basically lost revenue from that was passed from Trump that was carried over into Biden's admin.
Yeah, but we can't do this thing where Republicans are not responsible for any success that they ride the tailwinds of, and Democrats are not responsible for any failures that they have to ride the headwinds of.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I can point to measurable Republican failures over and over again.
Yeah, but I'm saying, you say Trump inherited Obama's economy.
Yes.
And I'm like, yeah, he stewarded the economy that he had. It didn't go off a cliff, and there's something to be said for that. And similarly, Clinton did the same with Reagan. So
Republican, he didn't steward the economy. He overheated it. And then they cried about inflation a few years later. He came in under Obama, and the markets went from growing 10, 15% every year to 20 to 25% every year for 3 years. And he did that with a massive deficit spend by cutting all these taxes and not pairing them with any government spending cuts. And then the same Republicans now want to come in and say, well, Trump's going to be the guy to save our budget. He couldn't do it when the economy was going well. Why would we expect him to do it now?
Well,
That's a very interesting point. Very interesting point.
say in the case of like overheating the economy, remember a lot of these changes were made in, as we both acknowledge, prosperous economic times, and then COVID hit, and then the same tax cuts and things that they did in times pre-COVID were not that effective post-COVID. And I will say to Biden's credit, I think he inherited a really difficult situation and he prevented it from going completely off of a cliff. But again, when we say, oh, well, if we talk about what level of confidence that we should have that Trump is able to resolve the debt and the deficit, given that he didn't do it the first time, I'm not confident that he was even trying. I think he was taking the economy that he had and trying to add more gas to it. And he did that until the point where it was no longer a viable option per COVID. And when we say that, oh, well, Trump is inheriting an economy that was booming under Biden, I don't think that was the experience of a lot of Americans on the ground. I mean, yeah, I guess equities were doing well, and I guess some of the top line was looking really good. But a lot of the reason why Trump got elected in the first place is because the average American, the cost of their groceries and their gas and their eggs, the things that they actually
Oh my goodness,
on
bro.
Biden, I don't think that was
shit.
well. Trump is inheriting an economy that was booming under Biden. I don't think that was the experience of a lot of Americans on the ground at the first time it hit, and then the same tax cuts and things that they did in times pre-COVID were not that effective post-COVID. And I will say to Biden's credit, I think he inherited a really difficult situation and he prevented it from going completely off of a cliff. But again, when we say, oh, well, if we talk about what level of confidence that we should have that Trump is able to resolve the debt and the deficit, given that he didn't do it the first time, I'm not confident that he was even trying. I think he was taking the economy that he had and trying to add more gas to it. And
what? He wasn't trying? Okay.
he did that until the point where it was no longer a viable option per COVID. And when we say that, oh, well, Trump is inheriting an economy that was booming under Biden, I don't think that was the experience of a lot of Americans on the ground.
Yeah, but you also acknowledge that Biden had a difficult situation to deal with. The entire world was struggling due to what happened with COVID. So bringing up what people are feeling is irrelevant to the conversation.
I mean, yeah, I guess equities were doing well, and I guess some of the top line was looking really good. But a lot of the reason why Trump got elected in the first place is because the average American, the cost of their groceries and their gas and their eggs and the things.
And they were blaming Biden, even though it was a result of the circumstance of the entire global world of a global pandemic. So again, you understand this, but you don't care. That makes it even worse for me, because you understand the circumstances and the context, but then you brought in how people are feeling to enforce a point that I don't even think you believe, but it reinforces your defense of MAGA. It's
things that they actually experience on a day-to-day basis were going up. And then over the longer term, the cost of houses were going up because interest rates were so high too. So even this framing of, oh, well, he inherited this booming economy, I guess it depends on what you call economy, but the actual economic experience of the average Americans was not good under Biden. And that's exactly why Trump got elected. And so again, I'm just talking about this fundamental framing of, oh, things were good. And then Trump either came in and he just rode that high, or he messed it up after things were good. I think it's demonstrably not what happened last year.
I mean, I think you can look at literally any economic indicator, and every single thing on paper will agree with the assertion that I'm making. And I just want to say it's a fantastic way to frame Trump's first 4 years as saying they were bad because he wasn't even trying when he was the president of the United States of America. But
well,
yeah,
I would
that's
say
weird.
it wasn't a priority. Like, as I recall, debt and deficit were not as much of a priority. And I don't think it's been honestly a big priority for any president in terms of actually trying to make substantive changes. I mean, maybe it's something that.
I mean, I feel like there's more important issues to focus on, especially since the debt and efficiency is not really hampering the average American, nor is it really affecting them. I mean, like I said, the 5 issues I care about the most, I said this on my podcast, is public education, healthcare, Black culture, the wealth inequality gap, and then what was the last one? And abuse in the entertainment industry. Like, I feel like there is just issues that matter more than this hypothetical idea of the destruction of the national debt that is not manifesting.
that you mentioned in a campaign. Everyone says I want to cut the deficit, but I haven't seen anyone actually make really substantive changes to try to do that. And I don't think Trump one had much of an emphasis on that.
I mean, I would argue that Biden expanding the IRS workforce by, I think they tried to do 80,000 people, would have been a really big step, although I think the Republicans have defanged that almost entirely now. And then I would say that at least the Inflation Reduction Act, the fact that they tried to pass legislation that had government spending that was offset by cutting part of the government, I would say that was an effort. And then you see things that Trump is trying to take credit for now that you mentioned earlier, all these investments into the United States from Taiwan chip factories or whatever. A lot of those are largely spurred on by the fact that Biden passed the CHIPS Act, which was more than just a tariff, but it actually provided for large-scale subsidies for domestic manufacturing investments from foreign investors. So, I mean, I don't know. I like Trump a long time ago. I mean, there's videos of him saying that the economy seems to run better under Democrats. I mean, I agreed with him then. I think it's still largely true, but I guess we'll see after the end of these 4 years how people try to rationalize away everything that's happened so far.
So there are millions of people in the US who are here illegally. What should be done with those who are already here? And what, if anything, should change to prevent illegal immigration moving forward? Would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah. So we touched on, or Stevens touched on this super briefly when you talked about deporting the people who are doing a lot of the job.
So for the first two debates in regards to Doge and what was the first? What was the other? What was the? Does not have a. What was the first one about? Doge and tariffs. I'm gonna be honest. He didn't really have an opinion on tariffs, and then Doge. He didn't really. I'm gonna be honest. Destiny's winning 2-0.
Jobs that actually are necessary for the economy. And I agree, that's something that needs to be reckoned with if we are going to deport people. But before we even talk about things like the economy, or some people incorrectly believe that immigrants are committing crimes, and that's not true, or at least not at a higher rate than the average American, I think fundamentally and instinctually what's going on is a lot of people just feel like it's unfair to allow illegal people to enter the country illegally. And to give you a very simple analogy, it's almost as if you're standing in a line, right? So let's say you're at an event.
Hopefully Destiny brings up the part about the mischaracterization of what an illegal alien actually means, but
and you're standing in a line, and you're standing in a line not because someone is wagging their finger and saying that you should do it, but because there's a basic understanding of it. There's a social contract that we all stand in the line, even if we don't like it, and we wait our turn. The perception is that illegal immigrants are not waiting their turn, and it's
the fact that he qualified it with perception makes me think that he completely realizes the reality. Again, this is problematic. It sounds like you're trying to adhere to a base versus actually trying to divulge into a productive conversation. Let me see how he finishes, but it does sound like he is
it's from a humane point of view. I
trying to
totally
retain a
understand why these
reputation.
people are leaving desperate situations. A lot of these people are just like everyone, trying to live a good life, and they want to live it in America. But the reason why America is actually so desirable is because we are a nation of law and order. We've actually created a system where we have relatively reliable judiciary system and legislative system and executive branch, and they work together, unlike a lot of these countries that people are coming from, especially in Central and South America. So not only does it feel unfair to the average American to watch so many people just bypass the rules, while, by the way, there are many people who are trying to enter the country legally and not willing to break the rules.
I want to get my beard like that. I feel like it's always scraggly. I want my beard to be completely like down.
It also undermines the very thing that makes America desirable to be in the first place. Because if it's a nation of law and order, and we're allowing people to enter the country while violating law and order, then very soon the community that people are trying to break into is not actually desirable anymore. So from my standpoint, this is about fairness, and it's actually not a moral claim. It's a claim about what actually creates a sustainable community. And I don't think it's sustainable to have a community where we have this perpetual underclass of people who the only difference between this underclass of people and the other and legal immigrants is that this underclass of people managed to make it into the country. This underclass of people is now getting actually abused because they're working jobs under the table. A lot of the time they're getting scammed. A lot of the time, they don't have worker protection because they're undocumented. And I don't think it's a good situation for those people. I don't think it's a good situation for people who are legally. I don't think it's a good situation for people who want to be in the country legally either. So in my opinion, look, we can't do this in the middle thing where we have like second-class citizens in the country and we say, oh, well, they're providing, essentially, we're saying cheap labor. Like, oh, they're building our houses and they're farming our crops and they're doing jobs that Americans don't want to do. We need to either legalize all of them, or we need to remove them all from the country. So if we look at these two branches, like, okay, well, what's the relative upside and downside of this? The upside of keeping these people in the country is certainly from a humanitarian point of view, it's more palatable because no one wants to force
Also, we have more workers.
10 to 20 million people to leave the country. They have communities here. They have bonds here. It would feel really bad. No one wants to see women and children crying as ICE kicks down doors and kicks them out of the country. But what we would lose
Republicans
there
do.
is a fundamental sense of trust in American systems of law and order. And I think that it would actually not just create internal distrust, it creates external distrust too. Because imagine,
Oh my God, you are exaggerating. A lot of these people that are in the country are here through an actual process. A lot of them here, they're waiting for asylum process. A lot of them are have temp status. A lot of them are DACA, children of people immigrated here or illegally immigrated here. Like these are all processes that they are under that is just like overstimulated. Like the asylum process has definitely needs to get reworked. But you're acting like these people just came across the border and they're just chilling here. That no. Now, of course, if you disagree with the concept of catch and release, sure, but a lot of them are just waiting for the legal process to eventually work with them.
no, I'm a first generation immigrant. My parents came from Ghana. They waited in line. They followed the rules, they came here, they continue to follow the rules. So that would be the upside and the downside there. On a humanitarian front, it feels better, but I think from a social compact point of view, it's worse. The other alternative is you remove them all from the country. Now, I think a lot of the time, my criticism of the way conservatives talk about this is it just lacks compassion. It's about, hey, let's forcefully remove them here. They're illegals. Like even the terms that they use are just really unsavory. I would like to see us find a solution where we actually incentivize people to leave the country of their own volition by actually just enforcing the law. Like it shouldn't be legal for corporations to employ people under the table. It shouldn't be legal for people to enter the country. So I'm glad that we have locked down the border. I think that's something that Trump has done objectively well. To your question of like, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? I think we should be incentivizing them to self-deport by actually paying them to self-deport. I think that would be a lot more palatable and from a humanitarian standpoint and logistically more feasible. And I know they actually offered $1,000 per illegal immigrant who self-deports. I don't think that's enough. I think it goes long. $1,000 goes further in a lot of these countries that people are coming from than America, but it's still not enough. But yeah, I would like us to raise the amount that we incentivize these people, help pay them $5,000 and give them a time frame where they get to choose when they leave. But this in-between zone where we allow people to be here as this weird underclass, second-class citizens, and then we rationalize it economically. It goes against the spirit of America. And
They're not treated. I mean, some people try to treat them like second-class citizen, but I'll let Dustin respond. I don't have to respond to everything.
Resolved in this administration.
Yeah, I think that factually,
I drink Red Bull earlier, and my body's starting to crash now. Jesus.
for illegal immigrants, they are fiscally beneficial because a lot of them pay into government budgets. We don't get them generally in their child years, so we're not making big investments in them to raise them up to their tax-paying years. And then economically, they're beneficial because we're hungry for workers in the United States like crazy. Our unemployment has been incredibly low for long periods of time. The idea of deporting 10 to 20 million people is just wholly unrealistic. I think it's a fantasy wet dream by conservatives that it just serves some emotional end. It would just be disastrous in so many different ways. The additional funding we would need for ICE and CBP to do it, the additional funding we would need for, I think Texas was trying to volunteer giant facilities to hold people, the processing, everything, it would just be a disaster. I feel like the best way to do it would be, nobody wants to actually tackle this politically, but it would be some kind of like path to amnesty. If you want to make them pay a fine or something, that's fine. If you want to restrict them to just having green cards instead of ever becoming citizens, whatever. But I think some type of path to amnesty where they can stay in the communities they're already at, they can continue, paying for whatever housing, paying into whatever communities, paying whatever taxes they do, but just giving them some kind of tax ID or number and then more formally tracking them. I think that that's like the no-brainer solution if you actually want to solve the problem. Everything relying on deporting everybody, I just think is fantastical. Conservatives will say things like, we need a big wall with a big, beautiful door. I haven't heard any of these conservatives talk at all about making immigration into the country any easier. I haven't heard any of them talk about the fact that it takes 20 or 30 years for a legal person to legally immigrate from some of these South American countries or from Mexico into the United States. So it seems like at the end of the day, they just want to kick out a bunch of people people. They have no alternative plan to replace them, and then they're just going to pretend that somehow that's all going to work. And I just think that would be a catastrophe on like 7 different levels.
So before we talk about this, I'm experiencing this dynamic in the conversation between us where you're talking to conservatives, I'm talking to you. So what about my...
He's talking about the practicality of something that exists. He's talking about the side that is determining the current status quo that you're debating from. You can't speak. It's not more than that. It's
that we
not.
incentivize self-deportation.
I don't know what else you want from me,
My
bro.
answer is the same. It would be, but why would we
Sure.
destroy all the markets that these people overwhelmingly work in like that? Where are the workers going to come from?
We can import them legally.
So would you be in
that's what we used to
favor
do.
then of dramatically increasing the amount of immigrants that we accept or making it much easier to immigrate here?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
If that was a position that anybody else took, I think I would probably be okay with that. Although at that point, I would say, why deport somebody, just have them reapply? Why not just do that? That basically sounds like amnesty with more steps.
No, so I wouldn't say you necessarily bring back the same exact group of people that you just deported. I would say, hey, you get back in the line, but you do get penalized because there are people who have not broken the rules to get into the U.S. who are willing to do the same job, who are willing to enter here through legal means. So I wouldn't say it's amnesty for the same group because I think we're talking about a different group of people.
But then why
One
would we
group of
shuffle?
people, let me just finish what I'm saying. One group of people came here illegally and they're being removed from the country. The other group of people is here trying to come into the country legally. And I agree, we need to make that significantly easier. And we need to have some sort of criteria for admitting people legally into the country that is transparent and needs-based. So if people are saying that, hey, illegal immigrants farm crops and, they build houses and all these things, I agree. They're providing tons of value to America. But let's have people come into the America on the right foot by following the rules and doing those jobs. And there's
What irritates me about this though is that my perception of you, since we love to use the term perception, right, is that you're arguing not in defense of, but aligned with the kind of conservative principles that exist. So that's what it seems like to me when it comes down to you and what you're providing or what you're doing right now. Debating on the side of what they're doing and the rationale behind the deportations. So you can't distinguish yourself away from that if they do not also abide by the logic of the idea of making immigration easier. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It just doesn't make sense on like the way you're kind of coming at this conversation. It sounds like you're trying to protect yourself, but also rationalize what they're doing.
Plenty of people in the world who would love to come in America and do those jobs properly, legally. So for me, it's like, okay, well, maybe the deeper question here, I'm going to say, and you let me know if it's not really a concern for you, but I think the deeper question here is why would we cause economic disruption given that these people are integrated into our economy? And I would say it's the price of fairness. It's a price of...
No, because they just wanted to get rid of all these people in the country. There's also an underlying theme that they think that a lot of these people are swaying the election by getting votes, even though that hasn't been proven. No, it's nothing about fairness. You're giving so much credence to the actions of Republicans, but also trying to distinguish yourself from them. It doesn't make sense to me. It's a weird type of debate we're having right now. Unless you condemn the approach that is also perceived from the Republican side, that let's say it's not actual existing, even though you also try to separate yourself from Republican intentionality earlier and Republican mindset earlier. I don't get what we're doing here. I don't understand it.
Of restoring trust in our systems of law and order. And yeah, to me, it's like if it would cost us $100 billion, $200 billion, some contraction of the economy, I would actually say that's worth it long term. Because I think part of the reason we have so much polarization and division...
Bro, this is so weird. It seems like you're working backward with how you're articulating your debate logic.
And one of the reasons why now twice Trump has gotten elected on a campaign that makes immigration the top issue is because I think intuitively people just feel, hey, this is not how we do things in America. We don't...
Because they've been lied to on what is actually going on.
Don't get to selectively enforce rules. We don't get to just turn a blind eye. We don't just talk about freedom. We also talk about...
We aren't selectively enforcing rules. The rules of keeping criminals out, the rules of preventing certain people in, still exists. It's just there are definitely illegal immigrants who are taking advantage of a current rule. So if you want to talk about a current rule when it comes to catch and release and the asylum process, that's different.
Responsibility, because that's what made this country so great that people want to join it in the first place. So yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to continue to push back every time talking conservatives, because like I'm Kaizen, I'm not conservatives, I'm
Sure.
not these other
Yeah,
people.
I understand. I'm sorry, but I mean,
I think Destiny's going to say exactly what I just said. Let's see what he does.
like obviously I'm speaking to largely the conservative argument. I mean, if you want to talk about fairness, it's hard because you're defending, or you're not defending, but you're saying that Americans care about this in the same breath. Trump is a 34-time convicted felon who's dismissed cases against him, impeded his own investigations, and is engaged in like more overtly corrupt forms of lawfare than anybody probably combined, every single president in U.S. history. So the idea that Americans have some intuitive feeling about fairness is just completely and totally unsubstantiated, in my opinion. Number one, and then number two, like. Again, if you want to fine people because you think something's not fair or whatever, I agree that illegal immigration, it's not fair, I guess, that they came in illegally, but the amount of economic harm that you would cause to this country, like if we were a shining beacon of law and order, through and through in every way, then I could see maybe there being some argument for it, but not with this president elected a second time. Absolutely not.
That wasn't a good argument, Dustin. I don't know. There is a better way you could have argued that.
Okay, well, now we open Pandora's box and we're talking about Trump as a person and, his legal breaches or ethical breaches and the Stormy Daniels case and these 34 convictions. I personally don't want to go there. I feel like it's been litigated till kingdom come. I don't know that we're going to convince anyone during this. And I think there's better things.
Sure. I only bring that up in
on.
response to the idea that we're like the law and orders nation. It seems like we are pretty flexible on that right now. So,
well, I think we've been flexible on it.
Principally, he's still correct though. Like I get what you're saying, Destiny, but principally he is correct about being the law and order state. This diminishing people's choice of choosing Donald Trump. I feel like there's just a better way you could have articulated this conversation in the ways that has been kind of elicited based on of his reasoning on why these deportations are justified, it seems. I think his argument of justification is pretty weak in general. So I think there's ways you could dove into that much better.
Across every president, Democrat and Republican.
Nobody compares to the current one, not even remotely close. Yeah.
When we talk about this specific issue, which is people coming into the country illegally. And I don't want to blow out the conversation by talking about Trump and whether
even Reagan suggested amnesty, right?
Yeah, he did. And I think it was actually a mistake. He didn't just suggest amnesty. He gave amnesty in California. And I think that artificially distorted the political environment there. And that's why I'm actually considering moving from LA, because I think it's become a place that doesn't respect law and order and has a ton of inefficiency and is actually squandering a lot of the largesse that it naturally
isn't. California, no, it's not. I feel like I saw this recently. California has like the 4th biggest economy. I think it has a bigger economy than Japan. I think I saw that somewhere.
So I think that's actually the effect of providing amnesty. It's like it erodes the social fabric fundamentally in a way that I think is worth actually economic disruption. So I would personally say, yeah, I'd be willing for my life to be harder for a few years because we actually did things the right way. I'll be willing for my life to be harder if we said, hey, we're going to show these people the door as compassionately as we can. We're going to have them self-deport by enforcing the laws and providing incentives as compassionately as we can. And we reset the deck and we do this properly.
Damn, the thunder blew out the
president has been willing to do it properly. I will say, as a critique of Trump, he has not talked about reforming the legal immigration process at all. And I think that's a failing because I think the way that comes across is, hey, not only do you not care about immigrants more generally, because it connotes this undertone of some sort of xenophobe. I'm not saying that's what he is, but that's what it can look like to a lot of people. I agree that illegal immigrants are providing a lot of value, and we need to get that value from somewhere. I'm just saying we can get it from legal immigrants. And as a point of fairness, those legal immigrants should be the people who have been waiting in line patiently to get into the country the right way, not people who broke the law and are already here and for whom it's inconvenient to leave the country because we started enforcing the law.
Sure. But if Donald Trump suggested tomorrow he can push a button to deport 20 million people with no path to getting anybody else in here, would that be something you would support?
Sorry, say the question again.
Let's say that we could push a button tomorrow and deport 20 million people, but there was no realistic mechanism to replace even a tenth of that. Would you support that? I just don't understand because this is because the fact that you even had to think about it says enough about that question. Because apparently Americans were so, and this is also a thing where I have a hard time figuring out what anybody actually cares about. Before we said Americans were so concerned about the economy, they were so concerned about like the cost of groceries and everything, and now we're like, I think we can actually sustain hundreds and hundreds of billions of economic damage to deport people that. For a lot of these people, they don't even see them every day. You know, people in swing states have these super strong feelings about illegal immigrants that are like in Texas and California. It's like, what?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I had to think about it is because it's actually a nuanced question. Like, what's worth it? What is it worth it to you to just solve the illegal immigration problem, take the economic damage, and have no route out? And I would say probably not. And that's not what we should be doing anyway. I think the better question is, are you in favor of removing people and simultaneously making legal immigration more viable? Or would you just rather keep people in the country and make legal immigration more viable? It sounds like you're in favor of just keeping people in the country, and it sounds like we both agree that legal immigration needs to be made more viable. I am saying I would rather we gently remove and incentivize people to remove themselves from the country, because I agree forceful deportation of 10 to 20 million people is not logistically viable, and we do this right.
Oh, I respect that then. I'm glad we're there then. I think we're reaching a good common ground.
Right.
Why can't we just do like we in Ellis Island? There were a ton of people that came in. They just wrote a name in a book. Well, I know from Cuba, you had the Mariel boat lifts or whatever. Tons of people, tens of thousands of people just came in and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll take it. Why not write a law in Congress saying like, listen, if you're here, go to your office, sign up or whatever, and we're going to figure out a pathway to at least having a green card, since they're already embedded. They're already like, imagine if you're like a landlord, or imagine if you own a business and all of a sudden like the federal government has just excised half of your tenants or excised half your employees, and it's like, holy shit, I have to wait for all these other people, I guess, like the harm.
Since I feel like I respect Kaizen more, the fact that he gave a legit criticism to Donald Trump. I don't really hear that often. And then we're hearing a foundation of like what would be the best case scenario, which is the interesting conversation. For me, when it comes down to this situation, giving them amnesty, let me think. Amnesty. I get the validity behind it, but I also get the principle against it. There is something interesting here. There is a compromise there, but I have to go again and get more water.
For every one, like if I'm a landlord and I've got 10 tenants and say I don't know this, say 4 of them are illegal immigrants, you're gonna take one out and then in the next day swap in a legal immigrant.
Oh no! I'm not saying do it in a single day. This can be drawn out over time. Like,
but businesses and landlords, businesses and cities and people that have these people integrated into the parts of their economy, companies, they can't wait months and months and months with no employees, with no renters, with no.
Yeah, and I'm saying that's why, yes, we have to land the transition properly. And maybe this is something that happens over the course of a year. Maybe over the course of a year, you say, hey, look, people who are here illegally, you get $5,000 to $10,000 to leave the country by the end of the year. Simultaneously.
I'm not mad at what he's saying, but like, who's doing this? Who's implementing this?
We're going to increase the throughput of a legal immigration system. Hey, businesses, so we've staffed the IRS, and I know you said we should staff the IRS. I agree, so that we can actually enforce the law, because you're not going to be able to continue to pay people under the table in perpetuity. So we give people a heads up. We give them a grace time to transition, and we do this delicately. It doesn't need to be we push a button and we remove 10 to 20 million people out of the country. I think the framing of that question is like, that's why I had to think of it as like, I mean, I don't really think it's a fair question because that's not what I'm proposing at all. But yeah, I think you pointed out a good trade-off. Like, are we willing to just remove 10 to 20 million people from the country illegally with no alternative? I think we should have an alternative. Let's just do this right.
Oh, that just is not a realistic thing in any way, shape, or form. The frustration I have is that these are real problems, and I think we need like real solutions for them. But it's always these like pie in the sky things that like this wouldn't even escape a Republican-controlled supermajority Congress of like, we're going to push a button and not push a button, but we're going to find a way to deport 10 to 20 million people. It's never happening. And then as a result of like entertaining these types of delusions, we just kick the can down the road and indefinitely never actually solve the issue. And it's actually so frustrating because these same people will then show up in 4 years and say, this is a huge problem. And it's like, okay, well, can we actually do something about it? Yeah. Yes, we're going to slowly deport 20 million people making legal. No, we're not. That's never happening. Right.
Well, I maybe just call me an idealist. I think it can happen. I think with
what odds would you, if we were to bet $1,000, what odds would you take for that. Like I would give you 100 to 1 odds that we're not deporting 10 million people. 100 to 1 odds. They're huge betting odds that we're not deporting 10 million people in the next 4 years. It's not happening.
Yeah, I don't think Trump is going to do it the way he's doing it. I'm talking about the way that we should do it, and I think that the way that we should do it requires generational leadership, and it's totally possible. I don't see anything infeasible.
I don't care about what's possible. There a lot of things are possible. 1 in a trillion things are possible. We should go for what's feasible and what's probable. Like what can we actually do?
So please explain to me what's fundamentally infeasible about overhauling our legal immigration system, providing incentives to illegal immigrants such that they self-deport, stepping up our forceful deportation so that the people who don't choose to self-deport, we do actually have to forcefully deport, unfortunately, and doing this with enough proper messaging in advance so that it can be done properly.
So the feasibility for number 1 is DOA, because it seems like nobody even wants to have a conversation about what legal immigration should look like in the United States, because we don't even know what.
See, this is the problem for Destiny right now, is that he's not at this point. I feel like you've properly separated a connection between a defense of what MAG is doing, right? I think he made it clear, or you can just ask a qualifying question where you can make it clear, but I'm pretty sure he made it clear that he is not, I don't know. It's hard with this guy. Okay, let's say you ask a qualifying question to ensure that he is not defending the actions of MAGA right now. Okay, all right, that's out of the way. Then you can address to certain principles in reaching a certain level of common ground based off, yes, idealistic notions, but that can be applied on a grand scale if enough people are talking about it in a very appropriate manner. Because Destiny, you can't do this, right? You can't complain about what other people are or not doing if you're not willing to have that conversation yourself. You have a big enough platform to go like, yeah, people aren't having this conversation, but I will have this conversation. So in this situation, you could be that example of someone who actually is having a conversation on how to handle the immigration process. So that's a criticism and critique to Destiny in the midst of this conversation.
I guess I don't even know what people's actual positions are. So, for instance, if you would have asked me 6 months ago or 4 months ago what conservatives thought about asylum, I would say conservatives don't even believe asylum seekers are real. That's, in my opinion, that's what they would have said. But now, apparently, for white people in South Africa, apparently asylum seeking is like the most important thing ever. And so these people are coming here for asylum, and we're all clapping for that. So I don't even know what a reformation of the immigration system looks like, because I don't even think we've come to the table and begun to discuss. A lot of people are under the assumption, for instance, that we only need high-skill immigrants. But then the H-1B situation popped up. I was like, actually, hold on. I don't think we need medium or high-skill immigrants. I don't want these people at all. And then for people coming from South America or from Mexico, it's like, well, we don't need low-skill labor either because reasons, I guess. So I don't know. So that's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of deporting people, it's a catastrophic impact to start deporting people en masse. If you want to talk about like doing these deportations where ICE is like going into a prison and they find some people that are they don't have good immigration status and they kick them out or whatever. Okay, fine, whatever. That's not a huge impact. But if you're talking about people that are just integrated into a community, that are working, that have their kids going to school or whatever, but they're undocumented or illegal persons, and then you start kicking these people out, it's not just even giving money to those people to make them right or whole. I don't even know if we're going to kick them out, kick them out. You're talking about a ricochet effect through these entire communities. You're talking about cars that are going to be abandoned, that aren't going to have payments made on them. You're talking about properties that are going to be abandoned, that aren't going to have rent paid. You're talking about companies that are going to lose employees, that aren't going to have workers. Like, all of these effects are happening for some vague notion of fairness in a country that elected a guy who's a 34-time convicted felon. Not to point anything out in particular about Trump. I'm just saying that it's interesting that we're able to make some concessions on fairness in some places, but then in other places we're like, we have to do this exactly 100% the right way. But that right way could never include some sort of amnesty, even though we essentially did that, like for people coming in through Ellis Island or the Cuba.
All right, let's move on. Jesus.
We need some kind of amnesty thing. We need some kind of immigration conversation. We need people to come together and have a conversation on this, but instead it's this, we're going to figure out a way to really deport 10 to 20 million people. And it's like, that's never happening.
Okay, so I feel like maybe there's just a gap in maybe what we think this conversation that we're having right now is meant to do, right? Because I'm not here to defend Trump. I'm not here to rationalize for conservatives. I'm not here to make this a Democrat or Republican thing. I'm here to identify the best possible solutions to the problems that we face right now. What I'm hearing you say is that you're fundamentally pessimistic that some of the ideas that advocating can even be done. I guess I'm optimistic about it. And I think that if we have conversations like this where we can at least identify what the best thing is, we can start changing the political will of the masses so that we can create enough political will to get them done. And you're saying it's infeasible. What I'm hearing is it's politically infeasible. I don't think it's logistically infeasible to do what I'm talking about. I don't think it's logistically infeasible to give people an incentive to leave because we're doing that. I don't think it's politically infeasible to enforce the law so that companies aren't paying people under the table, because we can do that, or we do it selectively. So let's just do it all the way. I don't think it's politically infeasible to force some people out of the country, although we should keep that to an absolute minimum. Recently, DHS reported that part of the reason that they're giving people $1,000 to self-deport is because it costs $17,000 to force deport. At $17,000, I agree with you. We're not going to do it. And that's why I'm saying, let's find this more easeful way to do it. So I think it's just a matter of providing proper incentives, enforcing the law, and increasing the throughput of the legal immigration system. And if you're saying, look, the conservatives are so intractable that it's just not possible, I guess I just disagree. Like, I think it's totally possible, but there needs to be enough public awareness of what is possible. There needs to be enough public desire to do something about it. I do actually think there's enough public desire to do something about this situation. Unfortunately, I think it's been channeled into a lot of animus toward illegal immigrants and just wanting to rain fire and brimstone and kick them out of the country. But I think underneath that, especially for people who are not strongly on the right, is there's probably a majority of the country who says, yeah, we do need some level of deportation. And in fact, there were surveys done around the time of the election saying that people were supportive of some form of deportation. And people just need to be made aware of the better way. So yeah, I believe it's possible. I think this conversation hopefully helps people become aware and change their mind and become open to that. And that gets channeled into the will of Congress people through the legislative branch, because that's the way government's supposed to be enacted. But yeah, we're talking about this vague notion of fairness. I'm going to say again, yeah, it's abstract, but it's incredibly, incredibly important, because right now we're the most divided that we've ever been. There's a least level of public trust. Things are being done forcefully because we can't do things through reconciliation and actual conversation. And if we just give up on the whole project of democracy and communication and doing things properly, yeah, you're right. We're not going to get anything done. But I think it requires us at first acknowledging that, hey, look, maybe we can change things. And maybe there's actually a moment right now in the American culture where people are open to change.
Yeah, I wish those conversations would be realistic, I guess, and then maybe they would be. But
let's have the realistic conversation. We're right here.
Let me just add something real quick. So it seems something you would both agree on is that we should incentivize legal immigration. Am I correct?
Incentivize them.
Legal immigration.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right. You agree?
I mean, I guess, yeah.
Okay. I think there's a sort of a disconnect on unfeasibility, and I want the viewers to decide what's feasible, but I want you guys to lay out your plans. So, so Stephen, you're talking about fast tracking the illegal immigrants who are already here toward green cards. Kaizen, if you could go into a little bit more detail of what your plan would be. Say you're chief advisor to the president, and you've got Congress majority, you've got Senate, whatever. What would be your ideal plan, and then we can let the viewers decide of what's feasible.
Sure. Okay, cool. So let's say we have a 1-year window to execute this entire transition. And first, we need to let people know what's going to happen before it actually happens. So we tell people, hey, look, we're overhauling our entire legal and illegal immigration system. Over the next year, what we're going to start doing is talking to businesses. We're going to enforce the law. Like, the existing law is fine. We're just going to make it so you can't pay people under the table to work at your businesses. You need to account for that.
I kind of agree with a lot of this at this point. Russia versus Ukraine, Israel versus Palestine. I mean, I feel like I watched a good chunk of it, and now I'm not in the mood because now I'm irritated. So I think I've been streaming for 4 hours. I think it's time to go to bed, man. With that said, y'all, we're going to take care.